on your movie.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone.
Can't see you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening, Rudy.
My name is Rudy Page, and welcome to Hope and Resilience, our series of online and wellbeing community engagement activities. And this is with AJN, Birmingham Solihull Mental Health Trust, and us as MCW. And we aim to provide communities with access to health and wellbeing information through the use of digital media platforms. Thank you for attending, and I would like to now pass over to Dr. Beverly Lindsay. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Foundation Trust, Making Connections Work, Association of Jamaican Nationals, Birmingham, UK, and my co-presenters, Rudy Page and Beresford. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here with you once again this evening to welcome you to this mental health awareness webinar. Our aim is to highlight the positive steps that can be taken to support mental health and well-being. This is part 4 and the final in our series of webinars. The first one was in December 2020, 17th of December, and we followed up in January 2021. And the theme on those 2 occasions were access information, support, and signposting, where we had a team of experts on the panel to guide us through where and how to access information and support. The theme in September, we had another one, 23rd of September, and the theme was hope and resilience. When we looked at the reopening of the country's economy and the possible effects of the withdrawal of furlough and other financial support. This is the final in our series for us to summarize, reflect on our previous themes and how we felt over the last 2 years and how we felt the last 2 years have gone, really. What we've learned and how we are managing our mental health, what we can do better. I'm pleased once again to be joined by Lakveer Rellan, Director of Community Engagement, Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Trust Foundation. And we have our esteemed guests here this evening, Mr. Jed Francisque, Head of Mental Health Partnership, West Midland Combined Authority. We are also joined this evening by some of our integrated care and Pcref and community engagement partners to share their learning experience. We have Catalyst for Change, here, CIC, the 1928 Institute, Alpha's Barbers, and Mary J. Hair Salon. I hope they're all here. I got that from information from Rudy. I'm sure this evening's discussion will again highlight the various barriers that can at times prevent people of different backgrounds from seeking and accessing help with mental health and other related issues. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions later, and you may also put your questions in the chat. Thank you for joining us this evening. And I would now like to introduce Mr. Jed Francisque. Hope I've pronounced your name right. Head of Mental Health Partnership, West Midland Combined Authority, for his opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's Jed Francisque from the Combined Authority. Oh, I don't know if it'd be helpful, but I was going to run through a few kind of slides to kind of highlight the issues. Would that be okay?
That would be fine.
Yeah. So
Rudy can help you with the sharing.
Yeah, spare me a second. Don't let me know.
Yeah,
Is
we can
that,
see it.
can you see it?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
we can see that, yes.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to whip through some of the slides, and in terms of the ground I'm going to cover, I'm just going to talk a little bit about mental health and its determinants, mental health and us, as particularly focused on African Caribbean communities and the impact of mental health on us, mental health and the pandemic, just to touch on that a little bit, some feedback from a community listening exercise, and also think about some opportunities that avail themselves of us. So mental health and its determinants. I'm not going to go into any detail about kind of what mental health is, because I think people know, but ultimately, just touching on it, mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So that's fundamentally what the World Health Organization say mental health is. And obviously it's a really, really important thing. It's important for us to be able to think, emote, interact with each other, earn a living, enjoy life. And as such, it's really, really important for the promotion of mental health and well-being, protection of it, restoration of mental health. It's really critical for individuals, for communities, and for societies as a whole. And just in those yellow boxes, it just highlights the things that really influence or impact upon our mental health: deprivation and inequality, employment, working conditions, etc. So there's a number of things that are quite fundamental in terms of impacting on our mental health. I wanted to lay this groundwork first because it's quite important in terms of kind of how it's played out with the pandemic. So mental health and us. Thinking about us as in particularly around African Caribbean communities. What all of us want, what everybody wants, is timely, good, effective access to services or the help they need. They want good outcomes. So if people are struggling with difficulties, they want to be in a situation whereby they've got good health outcomes as a result of interacting with the help that they need. And also they want to ensure that experience of getting the support that they need at any given point is a good experience. The things that impact on access, outcomes, and experiences arguably are those three boxes at the bottom. So we know that, it's a well-trodden path, a lot of evidence and research, not least quite a recent NHS Race and Health Observatory report, which came out last week, which looked at ethnic inequalities in terms of health in the round, but including mental health. And one of the things that they focused on, as others have, is the impact of racism on the experiences, access to services, and outcomes. So an obvious long-standing example of that in terms of mental health is the levels of detentions of Black males, for example, and the experiences of Black males in inpatient units, as an example. But there's other things as well, like, for example, the differential levels of access to things like IACT, where people need early support. So racism, whether it's structural, institutional, or interpersonal, has an impact on access, outcomes, and experiences. Stigma. So again, coming from a Caribbean background myself, when I was growing up, and I'm sure it's not too different from others, there were three kind of things that impacted on my view of mental health and well-being. One was, if somebody seemed to have mental health difficulties, people believed sometimes that it was some kind of obia or juju. There was some kind of, let's just say, spiritual influence on that person. Sometimes also people felt culturally that actually if somebody's got mental health difficulty, they're depressed or they've got anxiety, etc., that actually it's some kind of personal failing in that individual. But so there's a range of things in relation to our culture which might impact on us being willing to present our difficulties, mental health difficulties that we're experiencing, and also to seek help. So there's also those cultural kind of dimensions to it. I think also the distrust of particularly statutory services has been key, in that when people hear stories about people's negative experiences, in terms of treatment in some health services, people quite often are reluctant to trust services because, you know, quite often they'll say, well, do they really understand kind of my experience? Will they be able to kind of diagnose me correctly, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of things that impact on us having good quality outcomes, good experiences, and also the timely access to the support and help we might need. Just going back for a second. How that's played out in the COVID pandemic specifically is quite early on, we saw racial disparities in terms of hospitalizations and deaths, which obviously kind of rang alarm bells in many communities, in African Caribbean communities, Pakistani, Bangladeshi communities, etc. There was concerns around kind of the vaccine, and there was vaccine hesitancy. And I just want to stress that that's not the same as being an anti-vaxxer. I mean, there were some legitimate concerns, obviously, around whether or not people wanted or felt comfortable to take the vaccine. So there was stuff around that. Inevitably, people, there was the impact of structural racism and inequalities, the impact on kind of people's access to services or experiences. A number of people from African Caribbean, Pakistani, Bangladeshi backgrounds, etc., are particularly front-facing in terms of key public services, including the NHS. And early on, there was concerns around levels of infection, access to PPE, and also the strain that staff, Black staff were under, for example, and how that played out in terms of mental health and well-being. And in terms of kind of supporting people's needs during the early days of the pandemic or during the pandemic, quite often Black community organisations play a pivotal role, but there was issues around inconsistent investments in those organisations, and that potentially hampering kind of the effectiveness of the response at an early stage. So those were some of the challenges, and all this graph shows is the level of vaccinations as at November 21. So you can see that the top kind of line, the top blue line is white British population, which is not far off 85%. And then you can see African Caribbean, well, Black British, Caribbean, and African populations, you know, below 60%. So you can see that there was certainly at November 21 quite a distinct difference in terms of the level of vaccine uptake in terms of the two, both vaccinations at that point. So it's still playing out up until that point. In terms of community listening and kind of what communities were saying, again, this is nothing new, I think, to anybody, but some of the things that people were saying in terms of kind of during the pandemic and what their experiences were obviously fear of the infection, fear of losing friends and family members. There was issues around housing, insecurity and poor quality housing, particularly where there were extended families, you know, being, when there was lockdowns, being kind of in quite challenging situations around that. Employment status, financial insecurity, obviously children and young people being at home when there was the lockdown, homeschooling, and how that played out, particularly for women who had responsibility, who bore the brunt of responsibility for children, and how that played out in terms of mental health and well-being, isolation and loss of social contact, loss of coping mechanisms where people were doing sport and things like that. Obviously, some of those activities were truncated. So that impacts on people's mental health and well-being, and obviously the reduced access to mental health services where the services had to focus on the kind of high-risk, critical support that needs to be provided. And again, in terms of people that are particularly affected, we know people that lived alone who had a heavy reliance on social networks were particularly affected and, you know, feeling isolated, etc. Children, young people who had their education disrupted and had, in some cases, less access to pastoral care or other support they needed when they were normally at school. Women, particularly pregnant women and new mums, and we know there's stuff around neonatal care and maternity care of Black women and how challenging those statistics are in relation to outcomes. People kind of locked in difficult circumstances and experiencing domestic violence, financial insecurity, kind of limitations or fragmentation of social networks, particularly where that existed around places of worship and where people didn't have access to those places of worship, and also people with pre-existing mental health conditions and other health difficulties where access to help and support and appointments changed. So I don't want to kind of go on too much about this, but again, there was things that compounded those pre-existing challenges. So mental health support and the access to it, culturally sensitive support was also a challenge. You know, people might get support, but did it really meet their needs in terms of being culturally appropriate and sensitive? Financial insecurity, digital poverty. You know, there's people that where services understandably had to become much more digitally savvy and offer much more things online. But obviously where there was digital poverty, people didn't have access or confidence in use of technology that impacted on their ability to get the help they needed when they needed it, etc. So positives. So because my brief was to talk mostly about the challenges, so I've tried to whip through some of those kind of challenging areas. But in terms of some of the positives or the enablers, I mean, during the pandemic, there have been, as I understand it, some really good examples of community conversations and engagement to kind of understand kind of what people need, what people's experiences were, and to try and do something, put things in place that actually responded more actively and better to meet those needs. Online communities also were a positive for a number of people, particularly where they're socially isolated and they had access to the technology. There were some really good examples of voluntary community and faith sector organisations working in partnership with public sector organisations and meeting needs in a much more innovative and effective way. There was some really good examples of volunteering and people, organisations, community organisations and individuals reaching out and helping people that were in significant need. And also people talked about kind of access to green spaces and other activities as being really helpful in terms of kind of helping their mental health and well-being during the pandemic. So those are examples of things that were positives. Final thing I just wanted to throw in, and this is just something to think about in terms of kind of what the future holds and kind of what some of those opportunities are to continue to make things better going forwards. Obviously, we've got the integrated care systems coming in, and they provide a huge opportunity in terms of kind of making things better and much more joined up and much more effective and making these in a better way. There's a levelling up paper that's just come out from central government, so there's an opportunity to look at that and what that might mean in terms of making things better geographically, but also in relation to people with more needs. There's the Combined Authority's got a race equality task force, which will be running for a period of time, which will again provide an opportunity to understand kind of different facets of what could be done to make people's lives better from a race equality perspective. The CA's got a mental health commission, which is due to start in the near future, where again we'll take the opportunity to look at the impact on mental health of the pandemic, but specifically through the eyes of a range of different communities, including thinking about it through the perspective of racial disparities. And finally, because I suppose lining up a potential conversation for later, another example of an opportunity is obviously Catalyst for Change and Black Fire Global's partnering and the opportunity that might hold as well going forward. So that's a flavour of kind of my perspective of some of the challenges, but also some opportunities as well.
Thank you very much for that, Jed.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jed. And once again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. We're going to open up straight away, really, because I think to have Jed here is really important. And I can see the links to what Birmingham and Solihull are already doing. And I'm going to bring Latvia in and also probably Abdullah as well, and some of our Pcref partners. But initially, your observations and any questions that you might have while we've still got Jed, can you please just either pose your questions directly or please drop them in the chat and we'll try and facilitate that for you.
Are you going to bring Latvia in first, or are you going to leave the question till after?
Okay, thank you, Mashuk. You got your hands up, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to ask Jed while you're here, because in your life, you must have faced racism, stigma, whatever it is, and you are here as a role model to me and mentor, what did he make the difference while you transforming and changing other people's life? What is the connection, brother? What's the secret?
I definitely don't think I've got a magic secret. What I'd say is, in terms of my situation, I've been really fortunate to have supportive families, supportive network of friends, etc. I've had people in my life that have given me good advice, you know, during the period of time in terms of kind of how to handle things, how to think about things. I think I've got people that keep my feet on the ground and remind me not to get above myself. And I think sometimes there is something about trying to, you know, it is really, really important to be connected to things that matter. I mean, I feel passionately about Black mental health. I mean, Black health generally, I feel passionately about it, and it's really, really important to me. And I think I need to be connected to it. In relation to the other half of your question, which is kind of what I might do, I think it's also important for me to be giving back and trying to support progress. So in my long and meandering life, you know, some of the stuff we've talked about has been around for a long time, but I feel I've got a responsibility to try and do work with other people to try and move things on. So that, I suppose that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Jed. And just before I do go to Latvia, because I think it's really important that we can see the connections between, Jed talks about access and how important that is for our communities to have access to the information so that we can actually improve the experience of those who are using services. And within Birmingham and Solihull, you need to understand that we look after some 60,000 patients across Birmingham and Solihull. And of course, the disproportionality, as we know, as Jed has pointed out nationally, is high. But I think we're doing some good things in Birmingham and Solihull, I'm proud to say. We don't always get it right, but we're working towards that. And I think the racism, the stigma, and the distrust is a big thing within our community. Improving mental health literacy is going to be really important in terms of how we move forward to ensure that people do have access to service. And again, distrust is a historical thing, and that will be going on for a while. But again, I think within Birmingham and Solihull, we're starting to have some success there. And then, unless you've got any more questions, unless you're going to save them towards the end, I'm going to ask Latvia if she would just come in at this point and just share some of the things that we're doing throughout community engagement and throughout the trust as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Beresford. So for those of you who I've not met before, my name's Latvia Relin and I'm Head of Community Engagement at Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Trust. And I'd just like to thank Jed for his reflections, and many of those I can very much connect with. And I'm really struck by the theme of this session, hope and resilience, because we've been having these conversations about race and mental health for many, many decades. Certainly, I know some of us have been knocking around this agenda for a long time, and there's been lots of different initiatives, lots of different frameworks, lots of things that have come from top down, from the Department of Health as it was, and now NHS England. But the reality is, certainly from my experience, they've had absolutely no impact whatsoever in addressing the inequalities around race and mental health. And so for many of us, we have to have hope that things will get better, and we've had no choice but to be resilient and to keep bouncing back and keep challenging colleagues and services, but also supporting communities as well. So I wanted to talk very much about a specific piece of work that is underway at the moment. And I apologise, Jed, if you've not already been made aware of it, but I'm hoping you have. But if not, we can have conversations after this session. So the Patient Carer Race Equality Framework was a key recommendation that came out of the Mental Health Act review. And it is being led by NHS England, NHS Improvement, and our trust in Birmingham and Solihull are one of 4 pilot sites entrusted with supporting NHS England to develop this particular framework. And it's based on a set of organisational competencies. So we were approached around doing this work, and the initial, I have to say, concern that I had, and I know Beresford had, and I know many of my friends on this call had, was, oh my goodness, here we go again. We're going to go back to our communities. We're going to be asking the same questions again. We're going to be asking people to fill in questionnaires. And this, of course, in the context of a whole host of research initiatives going on around ethnicity and inequalities in the context of the pandemic. And so there was this sense that communities were going to be absolutely cheesed off, really, that we were going back in there to have these conversations where many conversations had been had previously to no avail and to no positive outcomes. So anyway, we felt that it was yet another window of opportunity. As I said, we've had to be resilient and hang on to that hope. I think there were challenges from the very beginning. Because we are a pilot site with a very particular population and diversity of community, we were mindful that whatever engagement we did locally had to be tailored for our local communities. And I'm sure our partners will be able to talk a little bit about the way that they were able to take that work forward. One of the initial things that really struck me, and this is a very personal perspective, was language. So I would go to national meetings, and understandably, there are regional variations in the way that people talk about these issues. And I would go to some meetings and I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to go back to people I work with in our locality and use this language in a way which is going to make sense to anybody? And initially, it was just things like racialized communities, which if you have a particular perspective and you're part of a particular network, that you would have an understanding of what that meant. I didn't necessarily think talking to somebody on Soho Road about racialized communities was going to help facilitate a meaningful conversation. I came across a term recently, racial fluency. I have absolutely no idea what that means. So I really struggled with how we would have conversations with people around that particular term. Anyway, despite the challenges, we've still felt that we wanted to do this. And I'm just so grateful that we were able to work with a range, I think it was 8 in total, community organisations who are by no means, and I have to stress this, and I know our partners will agree, are by no means fully reflective of the whole diversity and ethnic profile of our local population. But these organisations have already been working in this field for a long time, have community connections, some have a particular focus on particular communities, but crucially wanted to do this work and had the capacity as well to be able to do it. We've done things slightly differently in our geographical area, in that we moved a little bit away from the national questionnaire and the questions. And again, our partners will talk about how they did that work. So I'll leave colleagues to talk about the very specific work that they've done and the findings, but just to fast track and let you know where we are at the moment. So we are in the process with our research and innovation colleagues in the Trust in working with our community partners to develop a report on the findings of that engagement work out within our communities. Our partners have been incredible and have agreed to come together to form, we're not quite sure what we're going to call it yet, but a community stakeholder panel or a community collaborative that will work alongside the Mental Health Trust, not only to share the findings, but also to co-deliver and co-produce and co-evaluate the responses to those findings within the organisation. Really, really pleased that we've been able to facilitate some quality improvement methodology training for some of our partners to access. And we're also looking at the asset-based community development training to see if that is also a potential way of supporting our community partners. And our research and innovation team are also going to be offering some workshops and masterclasses on doing further research, if you like, academic research, so that we can really develop a robust evidence base around this. When we've got to that stage, we have also agreed that our partners are going to be coming to our board, our trust board, on the 30th of March, I think it is, and we will be co-presenting the findings of that engagement work. And we're just so keen that that feedback and that presentation to the board is absolutely authentic and not censored in any way through an NHS lens or through any management speak lens as well. So that's where we are at the moment. The organisational competencies, really interestingly, that have come up as being what are considered most important by our communities are not surprising at all.
No.
It's not rocket science. It's what people have been talking about for years and years and years. And the 5 organisational competencies that have come out as priorities are increasing staff knowledge and awareness of racialised experiences and how to overcome biases. Something about an understanding about how different cultural beliefs, values, lifestyles and experiences can be better considered within clinical services. And then the other 3 are very much about co-production, co-learning and partnership working. So what we're doing at the moment is working with our community partners to see how it is that we can commission them to actually support us in making progress against those organisational competencies. We also, as I said at the very beginning, are very, very mindful that this is not a consortium of organisations that fully represents every different community across our patch. But what our partners are very keen on and very comfortable with is actually bringing on board other partners as we go on this journey. But what I can say is I'm just so proud of the partners we have been working with, because they've been on the journey with us from the beginning. And actually, I have been I have felt very supported by those community organisations, because it is tough. It is tough to work within a service where you'd consistently, and by no means just me, many colleagues, consistently raising these issues, consistently trying to create improvements and being very deflated and feeling we're letting communities down when progress hasn't been made very much at all. But I do know that certainly the individuals and the partners we've worked with feel that pain, and they have a vested solution. And absolutely, I feel very strongly that those community partners also understand that this is a joint problem. It's a problem for health services and statutory services, but it's also a problem that's shared within communities. And we can only really make progress if we actually see it as a joint problem and recognise a need for us to find joint solutions together as equal partners. So I think that's all I'm going to say at the moment. Obviously, very happy to take any questions, but feel that the partners will probably have some really rich narratives and stories to share with you about the work that they have been doing out in communities, but also with colleagues within the Trust. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Latvia. At this point then, I'd like to bring in Beverly Stevens from Catalyst for Change, one of the Pcref partners. You've got a long 10 minutes, Beverly.
Would you be able to put up those 2 slides for me, or have you got them? Or did you?
I know you sent them.
Yeah.
While we're doing that, Rudy,
Yeah.
are there any questions regarding what Latvia had to say at all?
Sorry, can I just come back? Sorry, a point I wanted to make but forgot. I outlined the 5 organisational competencies that have come up as being most important for communities. There's actually 10 competencies that NHS England were asking us to consult on. That's not to say we're going to ignore the other 5, but actually the 5 that I referred to are the ones that we feel the community partners can really support in helping us progress those. The other 5 are really, for me, absolutely the responsibility of statutory services, and they're things like leadership and governance, around the workforce data, around digital inclusion and so forth as well. So that's not to say we're ignoring those, but those are issues that we've really got to sort out internally, and we've got a responsibility to do that. But the 5 organisational competencies I referred to are something that we feel, really strongly that we can co-learn around and co-produce and co-deliver with the partners.
Latvia, can you just remind us what those 5 were again, please?
Yeah.
The 5 top ones?
Yes, please.
Sorry, the 5 top ones were around staff knowledge and awareness of racialised experiences and how to overcome biases. Something about, it's termed cultural awareness, but essentially what it means is understanding how different cultural beliefs, values, lifestyles and experiences can be better considered. And the other 3 are very much about co-learning, co-production and partnership working.
Yeah, I'm going to start then, if because I think I can start without the slides, if in the interest of time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I'm Beverly Stevens. I'm one of the Pcref partners. I'm from Catalyst for Change, CIC, that works. Our aspiration is to work across the West Midlands. I'm one of 4 directors, and some of you will know Sandra Griffiths, Tipper Naftali, and Gerard Goshak from the Erdington Baptist Church. So we've been working with the Trust and with ourselves, if you like, as an organisation for about 6 or 7 years now. And as Latvia, much of what Latvia said, I was nodding my head profusely around the history and what Jed picked up on around the history of what's gone on in Birmingham, what continues to go on around, when Jed put his slide up around the issues facing COVID and the issues around stigma and discrimination. Catalyst has worked alongside and resonates with all of the discussions that have gone so far. We were set up in 2015. We were a group of people that said with lived experience, had gone through the many challenges with Birmingham Solihull and Mental Health Trust in varied patterns, and said enough is enough. We need to create something that can create everlasting change. As again, I think it was Latvia that said, we've been round this one and round it, and actually for our communities, their perception is that very little changes. And we thought we're a group of individuals that are fairly decently educated. It wouldn't have mattered, but we worked across the NHS, we worked across different sectors, and we need to step up. And that's what we've tried to do. And we work consistently and quietly often. Many people have said, well, we don't know about Catalyst for Change. You won't necessarily, because we've worked to put down roots and to be sure that we can be an effective organisation. We're aware of the feelings of our communities around, again, our own African Caribbean inadequacies. It said sometimes that African Caribbean organisations don't work well and don't function well, don't do things well. So very similar gripes, if you like, to what the trust, you know, the Solihull Trust have to face. And Latvia touched on that again. We've got similar problems that we need to address together. And that's really our approach. We're fundamentally at the moment a virtual organisation, so there's not an office that you can come to, but you can certainly contact us through our website and through each of us. And we felt it was a privilege actually to be asked by the Trust to work on the Pcref projects, really. As Latvia said, you know, the Trust is one of 4 organisations. When we were asked to do that, certainly myself, I felt that this was going to be a tall order, but it wasn't something that we were willing to shy away from. We felt that it would be difficult to go to the community, to our community, the African Caribbean community, and talk to them again about, you know, without replaying it, all the Jed said it, go over and over again, why they should get involved in another, what it felt like, another piece of research. And Latvia in particular will remember, I asked Sandra to speak to Latvia to say, look, I'm concerned about the questionnaire approach. I don't think this is going to work with our community. We're setting ourselves up here to fail. And that's the issue here. We've been very careful about tailoring what we need to, how we need to work with the community so that we come out of this with some results. We don't come out of this with not having done anything, or the community's feeling very much more disgruntled. Am I all right for time still? Yeah. So we embarked on reframing the questions with the Trust's blessings, and we came up with 4 questions, only 4, that we thought we would take to several community organisations, 7 or 8 organisations we went across, so carers groups, community groups, Black men's groups, women only groups. We talked to several groups, and we also did a significant and I think very groundbreaking work. As you can see Abdullah there. Hi Abdullah. Just, you know, groundbreaking work at Tamarind. We worked with Abdullah and Dawn at the Tamarind Centre to communicate and meet with between 15 to 20 men. Again, that was a privilege. It was a privilege to for the Trust to be able to break through some barriers to enable that to happen, and for Abdullah in particular to work with his colleagues, because I know that he did some significant work in the background to facilitate, you know, some confidence and faith that we would, you know, at the end of the day, these are patients, you know, that we would leave those patients with not having experienced something negative. I hope that worked for Abdullah and his team. It felt as if it worked for the guys that we interviewed. They shared with us extensively how they were feeling, and it is no surprise that the 5 competency areas that came up tonight that Latvia's shared with us are our information, the stories that they gave us absolutely fit with those 5 competencies. It was the same with the community groups, that the stories that we were told absolutely fit. The significant thing about this that I'd like to share is there was a real spirit in the community, having worried about the fact that they might close the door on such a venture as the Pcref engagement. But actually there's a shift, and that was refreshing. There were some painful conversations, but it was refreshing that we could get past the past, yeah? And there was a feeling that we could move forward, but we're still, the Trust and Catalyst for Change, we are still out on judgment for the communities. They will hold us and the trust to account. And I think I've fed this back to the trust. There is a strong feeling that it's fine, Catalyst for Change, you've come out and worked with us. And yes, we'll have a go. We'll have one more go. I hope they'll have more than one more. Yeah. But if, you know, this has got to work. We have no more energy for empty vessels and no more energy for things that don't change. So I hope, I've just tried to give you a snapshot, but you know, the messages are clear. The community groups that we met with can move past the past, but we have this one opportunity to make a difference, and it's around those 5 competency areas. I hope I can stop there for now.
Thank you very much for that, Beverly, and I'm sure we're going to come back to some of those points. I'd now like to move on to Kiran Manku, the 1928 Institute, another Pcref partner. Kiran, over to you.
Hi, thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. Do let me know if it's too loud. No, I'll do my best to shout. Okay, good. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and I definitely echo what's been said already, and it's really been a privilege. And actually, I was just reflecting on my involvement. So just to give you some background, I'm an academic at the University of Oxford, and most of my work has looked at mental health across other countries, specifically 8 African countries and across India. And a lot of my work there looks at, they basically have a lot of Western mental health care policy. And I found that quite surprising in those countries where I thought they would at least be more holistic and more reflective of local populations and their needs and their understanding of personhood and health and healing. So that's been a lot of my day job. And then I set up the 1928 Institute to kind of look more inwards and focus specifically on the British South Asian community.
Just sorry to interrupt, Kieran. Kieran, there's a lot of background noise.
Let me try and pop outside. Hold on. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you so much.
Perfect. No, it's
sorry
fine.
to interrupt you.
No, I appreciate it. It's useful to know. I'm proud you guys can hear. I was just saying, so I'm an academic at the University of Oxford. Most of my work looks at mental health and mental health care policy across African countries and India. And it is surprising to me that a lot of the policy and actually the healthcare and actually the measures of success of mental health care are based on Western models, so like access to seeing a psychiatrist and applying very Western versions of that too, you know, like not really looking at spiritual elements or kind of different types of counseling or culturally adapted versions. And I mean, you also get the very old school drugs as well, but that's more an issue with pharmaceutical companies that I won't go into. But yeah, then I set up the 1928 Institute to really look inwards and look at the learning that can be done in the UK and really supporting the population here. So my focus is primarily the British Indian and British South Asian population. However, I'm very aware that we do have similar challenges, but also there's a huge diversity, and I am well aware that actually the South Asian community is often more privileged than the Afro-Caribbean community. And I think there's huge diversity within the different populations too. So my work has been mostly looking at the South Asian community, and it's been really interesting. So when I joined the Pcref and was asked to look at these competencies, I think to me, I was like, it's going to be really hard to just ask people their opinions on these competencies and to use the kind of survey and go from there. So I actually engaged with people and looked at the process, like what I'm kind of referring to is the spectrum of mental health and how you go through the process. So often at first there's a kind of stigma or a self-shame, the kind of feelings that you feel about, is this happening, is this not happening? So that's often like the first phase, which has a lot of cultural influence as well as to how you would perceive that, and the self-stigma you apply and who you feel comfortable to talk about it with. And then the next stage is kind of like accessing mental health care. Then you have the treatment itself. And then the final stage is like the recovery, and which is also prevention. It's kind of like the additional support outside of treatment. So yeah, I spoke to different people. So patients, members of the community, healthcare professionals themselves. And one of the key findings that came out was like the clinical language used in the NHS was extremely alienating, especially because it meant that when members of the community were talking to GPs, it wasn't flagged up as a mental health issue, because it was kind of thought as, oh, they're fine, like they'll cope with this, and maybe they aren't using the same clinical language that GPs expect. And actually, even people who went through to the assessment phase would then get told there that, you know, they don't need it, this is just a cultural issue, they don't have a mental health issue, and actually many face discrimination and stigma in the process as well. That was a huge issue that came out. And that's why I think when the competencies come out about cultural awareness and knowledge about different communities, that totally echoes what we found, because that's exactly what they're saying. And it is kind of heartbreaking to hear that and to know that. And but at the same time, I am very hopeful that things are changing, and maybe it's because I'm a bit more newer on the field, so to speak. Maybe I'm not as worn down, and I'm kind of new into the field, looking at mental health in the UK from that perspective. But I'm very hopeful that we've been having really positive experiences, and maybe it's actually because I've had the privilege to work with you all, and you've all been so positive, and it's been great to learn from you and work together. And I think there's so many opportunities for us to collaborate and kind of work by example to showcase, this is how we can come together, this is how we can understand each other from different communities, showcase our common issues, and highlight where we have differences and where communities need certain needs, and where resources need to go. And I think that's something that needs to be highlighted. And the more we come together to discuss that, the more I do feel hopeful that change is coming, and that people are listening, and that, you know, it is getting put in the newspapers now, which is great. And I think we have to keep pushing, and we have to keep having those conversations to make those changes happen. And actually, I'm really grateful to everyone who has been having these changes, because I think you have made progress, and sometimes it's hard to see that. But I think we do also need to recognize that your efforts have been really important, even when it does feel exhausting. You've definitely helped a huge amount of people, and given hope to others, because you've definitely given hope to me, which is something, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And again, some of the points that you've raised, I'm sure we'll get back to. Right. So the final project is the one that I'm involved with AJN, Beverly Lindsay. And that project, we've just called it Alpha Project, because we actually started in a barbershop on Lascelles Road called Alphas. And we used 3 of the key words that those of us who've worked in mental health for a while will know, that the 3 key words when it comes to the best outcomes for an individual, and that's to be treated with love, compassion, and with humanity. So they're the 3 words that go with the Alpha. And what we embarked on was that the community responds better within surroundings in which they're familiar with. And I'm now talking particularly about the Caribbean population group now, where we specialize in, so the barbershop, the hair salon, and also our faith groups, so the church groups and the men's groups as well. So our approach was then, and based on the Pcref model set out by Latvia, I must say I've been around the block a few times, and this is, to my mind, the best framework I've come across from a system point of view, and also from a community engagement involvement point of view. And those of us who know, they're very different, three different areas when it comes to collaboration within the health system. So what we did as well is, first of all, we put four questions to ourselves, to our community. And I'm glad Mark Nelson is on here as well, because he's going to give a short kind of testimony around some of the challenges around that. And but the outcomes were good, because, as was being said before, this has been a genuine, authentic attempt to get our communities involved. So what we said was, what are the mental well-being challenges that the community solves for itself? What actions need to be taken to improve the feeling of community well-being? What are your ideas for improving the quality of services provided by the community for its own well-being? Tell us what you think the best ways for improving access to its own community well-being services. So again, we took this, what we call the separate and complementary approach. So yes, there's the community and its thinking, but also there were two key questions for the system itself. So for the system, two simple questions. What else should mental health services be doing to improve access, experience, and outcomes to address the issues of overrepresentation, disproportionality, and vulnerability? And then also, when have you seen or experienced positive practice? I'll just mention the Elders project that Beresford leads on. Hopefully we'll get some time for Beresford just to give a quick overview on that. So there were the two system questions, and what we said was, those questions for the system, you could address those through the Pcref survey or go online. And as was mentioned before, it wasn't, the language in there wasn't really consumer friendly, but I say consumer friendly to patients and service users and the public, but most importantly, it at least showed that we had been able to define where some of the responsibilities lay. So our methodology was simple: small group meetings focus on building trust, confidence, and shared understanding about that collective understanding. Because we can share the understanding about what's going on, but at the end of the day, we need collective understanding, collective responsibility, and that, to us, that understanding, we've got more chance if people are in a safe and familiar setting. And just very quickly before I move to Mark, the emerging themes from our activities was that access and accountability for quality improvement and measurement, improving community understanding of diagnosis and medication, population-based commissioning, and that includes review, participation, and representation, professional collaboration, and that came across very strong. So, and I think it was Beverly touched on that, the professional collaboration within our community itself. And actually through this pandemic, the term we've been using is the community is the workforce and the workforce is the community. And that's really important. So the trusted messengers and the subject matter experts, particularly from the Caribbean population groups, we need a greater level of professional collaboration. the intersectionality and socio-education economic circumstances within the Caribbean communities. So within the Caribbean communities, no different to any of the other population groups, you've got people with all kinds of advantages and disadvantages, experiences, etc., etc. And we really have to take that into consideration more, particularly if we are going to, engage communities and break down the barriers from the past, which has already been mentioned. So we've got to dismantle those barriers of mistrust within our communities, that's within ourselves, and rebuild the trust and hopefully improve the outcomes. Prevention, self-care, and self-care management. So again, increasingly through the pandemic, as the start of this platform was very much about self-care practice for life because of the underlying conditions, etc. And then finally, which we were really impressed was when we first started, all the groups said we must focus on the youth and their development and the challenges that young people have. And one or two said, look, there's not much can be done for our generation now, but we really want you to look about how you can better support the youth. And that really came, that thinking really came up from the barbershops. So we were impressed with that. So I'll stop there. Over to you, Mark. You unmute.
Sorry, thank you, Rudy. Right, my talk is going to be pretty brief. Rudy quite eloquently went through basically what the meetings covered and what we sort of got through and what the sort of general consensus was. I'm here to represent Alpha, Barbers and Mary J's, and I'm very, very happy to be part of the project. I'm very optimistic in the success moving forward of this type of project. I just want to give a little background about myself. I developed and ran a health and social care business for about 14, 15 years in Birmingham. I employed, I'd say over the years, hundreds of people. I provided services to hundreds of people with various needs, mental health being one of them. So I have a great interest and passion for this type of project and the community in general. And I understand the complexities, I have appreciation for the complexities and for needing a solid framework and the commitment to work the framework to get positive outcomes. So I think this is right up my street. When I first got involved with this, with Pcref, met Rudy, I think I was one of the people that you can consider, just Rudy smiling now, consider challenging, because basically I heard a lot of this over the years. Like I said, I've been put in business as a youngster growing up in the system, etc. I heard a lot of the stuff and I became disheartened myself, which is one of the reasons why I went out to develop a business and be a leader, if you like, in the community, put my best foot forward. And I learned a lot working with councils and other organizations, other leaders of business, etc. So I see my role really, I feel that I'm a very positive person and a pretty good communicator. I see my role as in outreach, reaching out to the community, the wider community, other professionals, organizations, and help to bring these skills together. But going back to our meetings, what came out of our meetings for me, one of the biggest things was the word trust, and I've heard this mentioned a lot today. Trust. Our community, I think over the years, have become disheartened and untrusting of the system. And I think this is reflected in what Beresford mentioned about 60,000 people being in the system. And I think our community represents 16.6%, I believe, something like that, which is very, very high. what came out of the meetings was that we already have, if you like, something that it was a jewel in our community that helped us. There was not much focus on it, but it was an institution, which is our barbershops mainly, and our salons. People within the communities felt totally comfortable. I remember going there, and barbers at a young age, and the guy that was cutting my hair knew my family, knew my dad, talking about, you know, I just felt like it was part of the extension of my family. So you start to feel comfortable, you know, you start to mess around in the corner. You felt at home, but you're in the barbers. That was the only place outside of the home that I felt that, reflecting going back. So we have we had a place where customers would freely share information about how their day was, how their life is, relationships, etc. And the person providing the service would be a good listener, and also they had a blade in their hand, so they were trusted. You see what I mean? So it was a perfect synergy, really. And what came out of our meetings is that we can utilize this system and make it into a project, into a program where we put systems in place. We provide training and information and use these these businesses to provide a service. Could signpost, they'll be informed. There can be a signposting, a place of signposting people to services that they may find useful. We can get other organizations and professionals involved from other businesses, which I think is vital to start to create a network within our communities, a positive network where businesses are actually working together for the betterment of the community. So I don't think it's something, it requires hard work, yes, but we do feel it's something that it lends itself naturally to become a very effective framework and media for moving things forward and not get stuck in the old rhetoric that we have been in for years. I don't think there's much more I have to say. I mean, we did go into detail. We talked about, sorry, Rudy, things that we look at, the sentiment of meetings to ensure that we have a better chance of engagement. So we think about the sort of meetings we'll have. We were talking about the youths, accessibility to services, which was mentioned, positive reinforcement. There's, my age group, we've been, our time's not come and gone. I'm not that old, but, it's the youth. We've got to consider what we can do in regards to youth coming through the system so they don't actually experience what we have over the last decade, 3 or 4 decades.
Right.
And that's basically, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. And just to reiterate Mark's point is that it's also about that early warning, that early intervention, signs and signposting, and the community itself can really assist with that. So thank you very much for that, Beresford.
Thanks, Rudy. Thank you for those comments. And I think what is coming out of this for me, I really loved what Kieran was saying about research and how important research is. And I want to marry that up, if I may, with what Bev was saying about professional practice and some of the success that we've had in secure and complex care. And if you married up that with what Mark is saying, I would encourage Kieran, if you could somehow, because you'll have a lot of literature review to do, but if you could come out and just sit in those spaces. And I'm going to ask Abdullah if he would share as well the impact that has had, because I'm around secure and complex care and I'm aware of the impact. And again, Jed, with some of his resources, I think if we could encourage the researchers to just spend the time in those spaces. Imagine, Kieran going and sitting in the barbershop and just observe it. And her narrative would be even stronger than it is in terms of when she's writing and reporting back, like from a research, it's the action research perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
So that'd be really quite powerful, especially when it comes to accessing resources and sustainability. We've talked about access, but also there's some sustainability that we need to think of. Abdullah, I wonder if you could just really, from a psychologist and one of our leads, just share your experience and how important that professional collaboration is.
Yeah, thanks, Beresford, and thank you all. It's really nice to hear the different projects that have been happening, and I know I've had some awareness of it. Certainly, I've worked with Beverly Stevens around it as well, and it was a wonderful thing to do. I think one of the things I'm really keen on in terms of increasing access and things like that is also not reiterating or re-emphasizing a colonizing of spaces.
Yeah.
So when services come in and colonize the space that is already productive and supportive within the community, right? And that in itself can reenact some of the racial trauma that can happen within services, particularly. But one of the benefits of linking up, I think my position has always been that I can only support certain elements within my sphere, but increasing networks and connections of that would be really helpful. And the research element for me is looking beyond what we would see as Western models of research and thinking in. So I know Lakvia had mentioned 5 goals that have come out, and 2 of them we've already started really working on. We've been doing this. So ever since I started at Tamlin in 2019, we've been trying to think about how we can incorporate the models of African psychology and broader, right, South Asian-based psychologists into the service interventions that we provide, so the therapies that we provide. So you're not just giving off psychological therapy, which is based within a Eurocentric Western model. That would be the first thing. And in doing so, do that collaboratively with the knowledge of the people that come in, so bringing in spiritual stuff. But the research element is really important to me, because if we can continue to show that this is effective, and we continue to show and evaluate, and not necessarily by just questionnaires. I was recently yesterday, I was giving a talk at Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust around how to support CAM services, child and adolescent mental health services. I'm thinking about it is, we don't necessarily need, commissioners don't necessarily need to have questionnaire numbers-based feedback. There's nothing quite so powerful about people's word and people's experiences. And there's a lot of that out there, right? And rather than recreating that circle or cycle of doing that, but whenever we do, one of the things that I'm really keen on is, how do we create a pathway for people to just talk? And the barbershop idea, I know Rudy and Mark, we've spoken very briefly quite a few months back. It's certainly something from within secure and complex care and offender health, where it's about giving a space where people can go, and should they need to connect, they can then connect. Not that if you work there, you have to connect up. Because if you do that, what we do is, I think, and my personal opinion is here, that we end up colonizing community resources to do the work of mental health services, and that's not what we want. What we want is to build capacity within the communities that we live, for the communities to train mental health services, and for there to be a reciprocal relationship. And the important thing about that is then thinking about how do we then share what we have, the services, as opposed to hold it on our own terms. And I think the work that Kieran has mentioned and the research element really adds value to that, because what it does is give space for, we know, and if I was to speak more frankly, we know that people only listen to certain evidences. Therefore, if we give research, those people who hold the money strings will listen to those evidences. And we need to do a little bit of that whilst also retaining a sense of genuine authenticity. And I think that's a bit that I'd be really keen on supporting.
Can I just add to that, Abdullah? And you raise a good point, because in regeneration, what we would do action research. And then, having done the actual research, we would set out a set of recommendations. And those recommendations, then the people who are responsible for implementation take those recommendations and translate that into workable plans, whichever community or system you're working in. So I think the work that we've been doing here, especially collaboratively, is something that could be easily be done. We could look at this whole thing as an action research project, but with recommendations. And because we have got experience of the implementation, it's proven by practice. And this is one of the challenges we have across the NHS anyway. Even if you have demonstrated it works, it's whether you can get the resources to then scale it up, and whether you can influence the commissioners even to even think about it, to commission services differently based on that evidence. So that's when we talk about the commissioning impact. And that's why I think it's important that we do understand the commissioning process as well as part of this. So you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, can I come back to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the really important parts in thinking about this is that in holding hope and resilience, as this series is named, there's also something about connectedness of the stories that are not told.
Yeah.
And the stories that are untold and an awareness of those stories is the idea that sometimes when we do, well, I say sometimes, I'm being optimistic here, often when we do this work, what happens is the anxiety that services and statutory services in particular have is that it can lead to people undermining the work.
Yeah.
And it needs people to then be able to go, actually, what's going on here is there's an undermining going on. And in that, hold hope that there are people within the trust that are speaking up and going, there's something else going on here. This isn't about, because this is a successful project, why are we not supporting it? It feels like there's an undermining of that. And I'm not saying that's a malicious undermining.
No, it's unconscious.
Yeah. And it's also something about the idea that I hold the position that mental health services should be working towards a position of redundancy. So if you work towards redundancy, what you're doing is ensuring that the community around you is the people who hold the knowledge and the value. And that, I think, is a scary position for people who get their pay salaries from them.
Yeah, those lines of communication, accountability. Yeah, absolutely. Kieran, got your hand up.
Sorry, I just wanted to come in. No, I totally agree with what's been said about collaborating. And I think there's something so valuable at collaborating between like research and practice. One, because I actually think practitioners are potentially a lot more stressed. You guys are dealing with a lot more challenges that you need to immediately address, right? And we have more of that space to be like, well, actually, you should be caring about these groups of people. It shouldn't be a case whereby we should be building our own support systems or we should be building our own community organization. There is an onus that the mental health trusts should be building capacity. And that's something that I understand that people who are immediately providing a need, they themselves won't have the capacity because they are providing that need. And that's why I think interdisciplinary collaboration is so important, because everyone has different strengths and actually different headspaces, because you're dealing with different tasks and issues. And I think it's really useful that we encourage that collaboration too, because you don't want to have things disjointed, and there's such a value in research being ground driven and having that collaboration, because there's really no point in it otherwise. And it's, for me, it's been so frustrating when I see research being done and it's very much like research on people. It's not research with community members or with organizations.
Right.
And then that's just so frustrating. And actually, it takes a lot of effort to explain to people why you need to do this. And actually, I've been engaged with the Biomedical Research Council to look at public engagement. And one of the things they always ask me is like, we want to do more collaboration on mental health and engaging the public, but where do we go? How do we do it? And I'm like, you can just ask people. Just start somewhere. Like, there's a lot of anxiety I've realized in that collaboration and getting to that point. And I actually think having discussions where everyone's open and there's less, like we all know things won't go perfectly immediately. And I think having a discussion where it's like laying things out on the table, honestly, there are issues, how can we work together? And having people who are genuinely motivated to help is important.
Right,
Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, no, we understand. We all understand the frustration, and of course, knowledge transfer has to go both ways. It can't be just one way. So,
yeah.
Beverly
I am.
Stevens and then Beverly Lindsay. Beverly.
No, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just conscious that time is going, and there are other people on this call, and I know it's, we're talking among the partners, and so I wonder if we want to give somebody, that has joined us, that is not a part of this partnership, an opportunity to say something or ask something.
Yeah. Mine's just a quick comment, really. I totally agree with you, Beverly. Mine's a comment around, we haven't got time tonight, but Catalyst for Change is considering the notion around research and community-owned research. Can't really, that would be a whole nother conversation, but it's around the notion that our communities would invest in research rather than running away from it, and how we move forward with their input, as we've said, in the future, by them owning that research and being involved in that research wholeheartedly. Just a comment.
Thank you. Yes, I'm just asking, is there anyone on this meeting who would like to say something? I can see Bishop Aldred there. It would be nice to hear something from you, Bishop. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yes, it would be nice to hear your voice.
I'm
sure
diligently.
you would like to contribute something. Good to see you.
Diligently listening. Well, okay. Of course, if I had, I would have put my hand up. You realize that, don't you? But yeah. Well, thank you for pulling me out. I think what has been going through my mind is that, like I heard earlier, Latvia, I think, was pointing out that some of us have been on this road a very long time. I certainly have been, from the days when the sister who follows me in my long line of siblings, 11 of us in total, had a nervous or mental breakdown, some 35, nearly 40 years ago. So that was a time when I think mental health became real for me, having grown up in a church that largely viewed people with mental health challenges as though they were demon possessed and would therefore pray it out of them. I've been really pleased to see the strides that we have made over the years, not least in the Black churches, actually, to raise the level of understanding. Some of the courses which have been run have really helped to sensitize people. What's the course called? First Aid, First Aid, which has been, my wife has been part of the group which have raised it. The one point which I would want to make, apart from just a general observation and a general saying to all of you, Beresford and Latvia and others who've been working so hard at this, particularly in the West Midlands, in that trust, is this. I think one of the things that I think we're getting better at, which I think has contributed significantly to mental ill health, is yes, thank you, Beresford, mental health first aid. One of the things which I think we're getting better at is the issue of identity. And by identity, I'm really talking about ethnic or racial identity. I think the fact that, a bit like the children of Israel taken to Babylon, the fact that we live in a diasporic place, too many of the first generation, I think, struggled with a sense of identity. you know, you listen to a lot of older Jamaicans, especially trying to speak the Queen's English, you know, and I think how much easier it is for them, like in the churches, for example, where they come to the church and they can talk a bit of patois and people understand them. And I think that in society at large, they're almost, and I cite David Lammy in this rather mischievously, but, you know, when David Lammy argues that, you know, I am English, and a lot of people sort of follow that line, it's almost as if we're rubbing out people's identity, people's complex identity. The fact that I, speaking to you now, you know, I am the descendant of enslaved people. That's why I've come here from Jamaica. Now, don't just call me English and rub out my African heritage, my Jamaican heritage, which continue with me here. So I guess I just want to leave with you the thought that it is good if we help people to feel less rootless in their identity and more rooted in it, in its complex nature. That I happen to have live longer in England than I've lived in Jamaica, but I still identify with Jamaica and Africa more deeply as kind of mother tongue thing than I do with being British. Yet I have to claim that Britishness. So I think it helps enormously our sense of well-being if that issue of identity is not constantly being challenged in a way that attempts to rub it out and almost want to make us disown it, because then we become too rootless. And I think we are then easy cannon fodder for the winds that blow us to and fro with all kinds of issues that challenge us in the space. I'll leave you with that thought.
Yeah, thanks for that intervention, Joe. Must really quickly, because we're over time now.
Yes.
Thank you. I think what Joe said is really grounded to me, because I have mental health breakdown, and that led me to the police cell, in a prison, and then forensic secure, home treatment, community treatment. Now, what made me a different, it's not holistic care, not the medical care, it's the social imbalance in me, how to have a better relationship to myself, my elder, my community. That's made a difference. What Abdullah said really, really highlighted, because it made me think, because, you know, when you have a restrictive practice, there was a lot of elephant used to come into the zoo in this country, hundreds of years. They used to die 2 years, 3 years. They used to feed wrong diet. When they find out what's going on here, they thought we're feeding wrong diet. And that's what Joe's saying, because it's got to be holistic care. There's a lot of research being done. To have a less restrictive practice, you have to have holistic care. And that's what's making a difference. Personal center care, who you are, not what's wrong with you, what can we add up? Like what's the barber shop, the elder project, how can we build your skill system? Could be church, could be father, could be your community, could be walk in the nature. These are the different. I have lived experience, brother. That's where the good stuff. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And that's a great fitting end. Over to you, Beresford. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Well, again, it just remains for me to say thank you to everyone for your time this evening. People's time is very precious. I thank Beverly Lindsay and also Rudy Page for being partnered with us at Birmingham Solihull, who's well represented here today, I'm pleased to say. And we will continue with this work. I think, you know, the historical memory of organizations and also Birmingham is important. And as long as we can keep that at the heart of everything, coupled with the issues around identity that Joe has raised. And I love the point about research. And Kieran, I'm going to take you up on that offer. Latvia being the boss will facilitate that, I'm sure. It's really great if you could come and just sit in some of these spaces where some of this work is happening, which will bolster your literary review. And then again, we can go to people like Jed and say, this is what this cost. And we can also then try and deliver it, which will sustain what we're doing, not only for 1 or 2 years, but actually, you know, the next 10, 15 years. because
generational.
this is a big challenge. And again, thank you for everyone for coming. And again, Rudy, you want the last comment, or is that Beverly?
I'd just like to thank everybody. Thank you, Jed, for coming on the platform for the first time. And we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you and good night.
And thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Thank you. Thank you, Jed.
Thanks.
Guys.
Bye.
Have a good night. See you soon.
Bye.
Yeah.